I was standing on the porch of my great-grandfather's homestead when I first saw the woman marching up my gravel driveway with a clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield. The morning sun caught the highlights in her aggressively styled blonde bob, and I could see her jaw was already set in that particular expression I'd come to recognize in my 43 years of life, the look of someone who's convinced they're about to save the world by ruining your day. "Are you Walter Clayton?" she called out before she'd even made it past my truck. I set down my coffee mug on the porch railing, noting the way her sensible heels were already collecting dust from the drive. "That's me. I'm Deborah Hutchins, president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association." She stopped at the bottom of my porch steps, not waiting for an invitation before continuing. "I'm here to inform you that your property is in violation of multiple HOA regulations, and we need to discuss immediate remediation." I blinked at her, genuinely confused. "HOA? Madam, I think you've got the wrong house. This property isn't part of any homeowners association." Her laugh was sharp and humorless. "Mr. Clayton, every property in Meadowbrook Hills is part of the HOA. It was established in 1998 when the development was incorporated. You purchased this property 3 months ago, which means you inherited all associated obligations." "I didn't purchase anything," I said, keeping my voice level. "I inherited this house from my grandfather. My family has owned this land since 1923. Deborah's smile tightened. "Be that as it may, the property falls within the boundaries of our HOA, and you're required to comply with our covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Your home is not up to code. The paint is peeling. Your fence is made of split rail instead of approved vinyl. You have chickens in your yard, and that barn," she gestured with her clipboard toward the old structure that had stood for nearly a century, "is an eyesore that violates at least 6 separate regulations." My grandfather had passed away 6 months earlier at the age of 97. He'd lived his entire life in this house, as had his father before him. The property sat on 15 acres of land in what had once been rural Virginia, just outside of Charlottesville. Over the decades, the city had sprawled outward, and apparently, someone had decided to build a development that encroached on what had always been Clayton land. "When exactly did this HOA form?" I asked. As I said, 1998. All the relevant documentation is on file with the county. "And did anyone from your HOA contact my grandfather about this?" Deborah's expression flickered with something that might have been uncertainty, but it vanished quickly. "I wouldn't know about that. I've only been president for 3 years. What I do know is that you have 30 days to bring your property into compliance, or will be forced to take legal action." "Legal action," I repeated. "The HOA has the authority to place liens on non-compliant properties, and in extreme cases, to petition for forced sale or demolition of structures that pose safety hazards or significantly diminish property values." I felt heat rising in my chest. "You want to demolish my house?" "If you fail to comply with remediation orders, yes. The board will vote on the matter at our next meeting." She pulled a thick envelope from her bag and held it up toward me. "This is your official notice. You have 30 days. I didn't take the envelope. I'm not part of your HOA. "That's not your decision to make, Mr. Clayton. The law is clear." She set the envelope on my porch step. "I suggest you read the documentation carefully. Good day." She turned and walked back down my driveway, her heels clicking against the gravel with each determined step. I watched her climb into a white Lexus SUV with a "Meadowbrook Hills, where neighbors become family" bumper sticker, and then she was gone, leaving only a dust trail and the envelope on my step. I picked it up, feeling the weight of what had to be at least 50 pages of documents inside. Through the porch window, I could see the old photographs on the wall my great-grandfather standing in front of this very house in 1923. My grandfather as a young man working the land. My father helping to repair the barn in the 1970s. 4 generations of Claytons had lived on this property, and now some HOA president thought she could just show up and threaten to tear it all down. I went inside and spread the documents across my kitchen table. The envelope contained a notice of violation, a copy of the HOA's CC and Articus, maps showing the supposed boundaries of Meadowbrook Hills, and a timeline for compliance. According to their paperwork, my property was indeed within the HOA boundaries, but I knew that couldn't be right. My grandfather had owned this land free and clear, and he'd been meticulous about property records. After his death, I'd inherited everything. I'd been living in Richmond, working as a civil engineer, but the pull of the homestead had been strong. My grandfather and I had been close, and he'd always said the land would be mine someday. I'd quit my job, moved into the old house, and started the slow process of fixing it up while figuring out what came next. The last thing I'd expected was an HOA breathing down my neck. I spent the rest of the morning going through my grandfather's papers. He'd kept everything in a series of filing cabinets in what had once been a root cellar. The organizational system made sense to him, but it took me hours to find what I was looking for: a metal box with the words "Land Documents" written on the lid in his careful handwriting. Inside, I found deeds going back generations, tax records, survey maps, and at the very bottom, a document that made my heart skip a beat. It was a land patent, dated April 15, 1923, bearing the seal of the United States government. The paper had yellowed with age, but the text was still clear. It granted my great-grandfather, William Clayton, clear title to 15 acres of land in Albemarle County, Virginia, with detailed descriptions of the boundaries. A land patent wasn't just a deed, it was direct title from the federal government, one of the strongest forms of property ownership in the United States. If this document was legitimate, and I had no reason to think it wasn't, then my family's ownership of this land predated any HOA by 75 years. I grabbed my phone and started searching for property lawyers in Charlottesville. After a few calls, I found one who specialized in land use disputes and HOA cases. Her name was Patricia Morrison, and she agreed to see me that afternoon. Her office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, and she met me with a firm handshake and sharp, intelligent eyes. I guess she was in her mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Tell me what's going on," she said, gesturing for me to sit. I explained the situation, spreading out both the HOA's documents and my land patent on her desk. She picked up the patent first, examining it with the careful attention of someone who knew exactly what she was looking at. "This is remarkable," she said after a long moment. "Do you know how rare these are?" My grandfather mentioned it once or twice, but I never really understood the significance. A land patent is the highest form of title you can have. It's a conveyance of title directly from the government to an individual. Once issued, it's incredibly difficult to challenge. The property escapes most forms of taxation and regulation that came after the patent was issued. She set it down carefully. "If this is authentic, and it appears to be, then your property absolutely predates this HOA. So they can't touch me." It's not quite that simple, but you have a very strong case. HOAs derive their authority from covenants that run with the land. But if your land was never part of the subdivision that created the HOA, then those covenants don't apply to you. She picked up the HOA's boundary map. "The question is whether your property was somehow incorporated into their development. either through a survey error or some kind of legal action against your grandfather. He never mentioned anything about an HOA. Did he have a lawyer? Yes, Martin Fredericks. He passed away about 5 years ago. I knew Martin. Good man. Patricia leaned back in her chair. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to research the title history of your property and the HOA's formation documents. I want to understand exactly how they think they have authority over you. In the meantime, don't sign anything they give you, don't pay any fees, and document everything. They said they're voting on whether to demolish my house. Her expression hardened. They can vote on whatever they want. Actually executing a demolition of a property with a clean title would be illegal. But HOAs can be aggressive, and sometimes they count on people not fighting back. You have the law on your side, Mr. Clayton. We just need to make sure the HOA understands that. I left her office feeling slightly better, but the anxiety still gnawed at me. That evening, I walked the boundaries of my property, following the old fence line that my great-grandfather had built. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and I could see the lights of the Meadowbrook Hills development in the distance. The houses there were identical, with perfect lawns and approved paint colors, lined up like soldiers on streets with names like Harmony Lane and Prosperity Court. My property was different. The house was old but solid, with a deep front porch and a stone chimney. The barn leaned slightly to one side but still served its purpose. My chickens, 6 hens, and a rooster scratched contentedly in their run. An old oak tree that had to be 300 years old stood near the property line, its branches spreading wide enough to shade half an acre. This was home. Not just for me, but for everyone in my family who'd come before. I wasn't going to let some HOA take it away. The next week passed quietly. I continued working on repairs to the house, replacing rotten boards on the porch and repainting the trim. I wasn't doing it for the HOA, I was doing it because the house deserved to be maintained. But every time I saw a white SUV drive by on the road, I tensed up, waiting for Deborah Hutchins to return with more threats. Patricia called me on a Thursday afternoon. "I found something interesting," she said. "The HOA's formation documents show that they incorporated the development in 1998, as Mrs. Hutchins told you. But when I looked at the survey maps they used, there's a discrepancy. Your property isn't actually within the boundaries they established. Someone at some point redrew the maps to include your land. How is that possible? I'm not sure yet. It could be an honest mistake. Survey errors happen, but the timing is suspicious. In 2001, there was a petition filed with the county to expand the HOA boundaries. Your grandfather was listed as one of the affected property owners, and according to the records, he was sent notice of a hearing. Did he respond? There's no record of it. The expansion was approved and your property was officially added to the HOA district. I thought about my grandfather in 2001. He would have been in his early 70s then, still sharp but starting to slow down. He might not have understood what was happening. That's possible. A lot of these HOA expansions use confusing legal language, and they count on property owners not showing up to oppose them. Patricia paused. But here's the thing, even if the county approved the expansion, that doesn't override your land patent. The patent gives you title that predates any local zoning or HOA regulations. We have a solid argument that the expansion was invalid as it applied to your property. So, what do? We go to the HOA board meeting. They're meeting next Tuesday to vote on your property. I want to present the land patent and make it clear that any action against your property will result in a lawsuit. You think that will stop them? It should. But some HOA boards get drunk on their own power. We need to be prepared for the possibility that they'll try to push forward anyway. Tuesday evening arrived too quickly. The HOA meeting was held in the community center at the heart of Meadowbrook Hills, a bland building with beige siding and a manicured lawn. I arrived with Patricia at 6:45 for a 7 o'clock meeting, and we found the parking lot already full. Inside, the meeting room was packed with residents, most of them middle-aged or older, all looking like they'd stepped out of a catalog for suburban prosperity. Deborah Hutchins stood at the front with 4 other board members, arranging papers on a table. She spotted me immediately, and her expression soured. "Mr. Clayton, I'm surprised to see you here. I'm here to address the board about your accusations against my property," I said. "It's not on the agenda." Patricia stepped forward. Under Virginia HOA law, property owners have the right to address the board regarding any matter that directly affects their property. Since you're voting tonight on action against Mr. Clayton's home, he has the right to speak. Deborah's lips pressed into a thin line. "You have 5 minutes." We took seats in the front row. The meeting started with the usual administrative business: approval of minutes, treasurer's report, discussion of the community pool schedule. I barely heard any of it, my mind focused on what I was going to say. Finally, Deborah cleared her throat. "We now come to new business. Item 7 is the discussion and vote regarding the property at 4782 Old Homestead Road, owned by Walter Clayton. This property is in violation of multiple sections of our CC and Articles. Mr. Patterson, would you present the violations?" A thin man with wire-rimmed glasses stood up. "The property in question has the following violations: peeling exterior paint, non-compliant fencing, unauthorized livestock, a structure in disrepair, specifically the barn, overgrown vegetation, and generally fails to meet the aesthetic standards of Meadowbrook Hills. The board has sent notice to Mr. Clayton giving him 30 days to remediate. Given the extensive nature of the violations, the board proposes that if Mr. Clayton fails to comply, we petition the court for authorization to demolish the non-compliant structures and bring the property up to code, with costs assessed to the property owner." There was murmuring in the crowd. Some people nodded in agreement while others looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Clayton, you have 5 minutes to address the board," Deborah said. I stood up, and Patricia handed me a folder. "Thank you. First, I want to make it clear that I'm not trying to be a difficult neighbor. I've been fixing up my house, which has been in my family for over 100 years. But I'm here tonight because there's a fundamental problem with your claims." I pulled out a copy of the land patent and held it up. "This is a land patent issued by the United States government in 1923 to my great-grandfather, William Clayton. It grants him direct title to the property at 4782 Old Homestead Road. This isn't just a deed, it's the highest form of property ownership in this country." Deborah frowned. "That's ancient history, Mr. Clayton. The current regulations—" "Let me finish, please." I kept my voice steady. "A land patent means that my property predates any local zoning or HOA regulations. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA was formed in 1998. My family has owned this land since 1923. Your HOA has no authority over my property." "That's absurd," Deborah said. "Your property is within our boundaries. We have maps." Patricia stood up. "I'm Patricia Morrison, Mr. Clayton's attorney. I've reviewed the HOA's formation documents and the 2001 boundary expansion. While the expansion was approved by the county, it cannot override a federal land patent. Mr. Clayton's property is not, and has never been, subject to your covenants." The room erupted in chatter. Deborah banged a gavel, calling for order. "This is ridiculous." Every property in Meadowbrook Hills is part of the HOA. Not this one, Patricia said firmly. I'm advising you now that any attempt to place a lien on Mr. Clayton's property or to pursue demolition will result in immediate legal action. You'll be sued for harassment, abuse of process, and any damages that result from your actions. One of the other board members, a heavyset man with a red face, leaned forward. We have the right to maintain property values in this community. One rundown property affects everyone. My property isn't run down, I said, feeling my temper rise. It's a historic homestead that I'm actively maintaining, and even if it were, you have no legal authority over it. Deborah's face had gone pale, but her eyes were hard. We'll see what the court has to say about this. Board members, I call for a vote. All in favor of proceeding with legal action against 4782 Old Homestead Road. 4 hands went up. Only one board member, a younger woman who'd been quiet throughout the meeting, abstained. The motion passes, Deborah said. We'll be filing a petition with the court within the week. Patricia shook her head. You're making a serious mistake. We left the meeting to hostile stares from most of the crowd, though a few people looked sympathetic. In the parking lot, Patricia turned to me. That went about as badly as it could have. They actually voted to sue me. They did, which means we're going to court. She pulled out her phone and made a note. I'll start preparing our defense. We'll counterclaim for harassment and attorney's fees. With that land patent, we should win, but it's going to take time and money. How much money? Hard to say. Could be anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000, depending on how hard they fight. I felt sick. I didn't have that kind of money lying around. I'd used most of my savings to cover the inheritance taxes and the move. Isn't there any way to settle this without court? We can try. But you saw how unreasonable they were in there. Deborah Hutchins strikes me as someone who doesn't back down easily. She was right. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation escalated. I received a certified letter from the HOA's lawyer, a man named Gerald Klein, demanding that I cease all violations and pay $10,000 in accumulated fines. When I didn't respond, I got another letter threatening legal action. Patricia filed our response, asserting that the HOA had no jurisdiction over my property and demanding they cease their harassment. The HOA responded by filing a petition with the Albemarle County Circuit Court, asking for an order compelling me to comply with their regulations and authorizing a lien on my property. We were assigned a court date in late July, about 2 months away. In the meantime, life in Meadowbrook Hills became increasingly hostile. Someone filed a complaint with the county about my chickens, claiming they were a health hazard. An inspector came out, looked around, and told me everything was fine, but the complaint went into my file. Then someone reported my barn as structurally unsound. Another inspector came out, examined the barn, and declared it safe. But again, the complaint went on record. I started getting phone calls at odd hours, hang-ups, and heavy breathing. My mailbox was knocked over twice. Someone threw eggs at my house one night, leaving a mess on the front porch. I installed security cameras and caught footage of 2 teenagers from the development throwing the eggs. When I showed the video to their parents, I got yelled at for causing problems in the neighborhood instead of receiving an apology. The stress was wearing on me. I'd moved to the homestead for peace and a fresh start, but instead, I was trapped in a nightmare of legal threats and petty harassment. I threw myself into work on the property, repairing the barn, painting the house, and reinforcing the fence. If nothing else, I wanted the place to look its best when we went to court. Patricia was busy building our case. She hired a surveyor to verify the boundaries of my property and confirmed that it matched the description in the land patent. She gathered historical records showing my family's continuous ownership. She researched case law on land patents and HOA authority, building what she assured me was an airtight argument. But she also warned me that judges could be unpredictable, especially when it came to HOAs. Some judges see HOAs as important for maintaining property values and community standards, she said. They might be reluctant to create a precedent that allows properties to opt out. We have the law on our side, but that doesn't always mean we'll win. As the court date approached, I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling and worrying. What if we lost? Would I have to sell the homestead? Would they really demolish the barn, maybe even the house? The thought of losing my family's legacy made me physically ill. The night before the hearing, I walked out to the old oak tree at the edge of my property. It was a warm evening, with fireflies blinking in the darkness and the sound of crickets filling the air. I put my hand on the rough bark of the tree and thought about all the Claytons who'd stood in this same spot over the decades. My great-grandfather had built a life here from nothing. My grandfather had raised a family and weathered the Depression, World War II, and countless personal hardships without losing the land. I couldn't be the one who let it slip away because of some overzealous HOA president. The courthouse in Charlottesville was an imposing brick building with white columns, built in the classical style. Patricia met me on the steps at 8:30 in the morning, carrying a briefcase stuffed with documents. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." Inside, we went through security and found our courtroom on the second floor. The HOA's legal team was already there, Gerald Klein and two associates, all in expensive suits. Deborah Hutchins sat behind them with the other board members, looking confident. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Sandra Pratt. She had a reputation for being fair but no nonsense, which Patricia said was good for us. The hearing started promptly at 9. Klein stood up and presented the HOA's case. He argued that my property fell within the legal boundaries of Meadowbrook Hills, that I'd been properly notified of the violations, and that the HOA had the authority to enforce its regulations. He showed the court maps, photographs of my property highlighting the violations, and the 2001 expansion documents that supposedly brought my land into the HOA. "Your Honor, Mr. Clayton is attempting to skirt the reasonable regulations of a lawful homeowners association," Klein said. "Every other property owner in Meadowbrook Hills follows the rules. Mr. Clayton cannot simply ignore them because he finds them inconvenient. The board has given him multiple opportunities to comply, but he's refused. We're asking the court to compel compliance and authorize a lien to cover the costs of bringing his property up to code." Judge Pratt listened without expression, taking occasional notes. Then it was our turn. Patricia stood and approached the bench. "Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about property rights and whether an HOA can assert authority over land that it never had jurisdiction over in the first place." She presented the land patent, walking the judge through its significance. "This document grants Mr. Clayton's family direct title from the federal government, issued in 1923. It predates the formation of Meadowbrook Hills HOA by 75 years. Under the doctrine of superior title, Mr. Clayton's property rights cannot be subordinated to covenants that were created decades after his family acquired the land." Klein objected. "Your Honor, the age of the property ownership is irrelevant. The 2001 expansion legally incorporated Mr. Clayton's property into the HOA district. He's bound by those regulations regardless of when his family acquired the land. But Mr. Clayton's grandfather was never properly notified of the expansion. Patricia countered. And even if he had been, the expansion cannot override a federal land patent. We're not talking about a standard deed here. A land patent is the highest form of title in American property law. It grants rights that cannot be infringed by later local regulations. Judge Pratt held up a hand. Let me ask you this, Miss Morrison. If we accept your argument, what's to stop every property owner in Virginia from claiming that their deed predates local regulations and they are therefore exempt from HOAs, zoning laws, and other ordinances? The difference is the land patent, Your Honor. This isn't just an old deed. It's a direct conveyance from the federal government with specific legal protections. The vast majority of properties don't have this type of title. And I would note that Mr. Clayton isn't seeking to avoid reasonable health and safety regulations. He maintains his property, he complies with county codes, and he's not creating any nuisance. The HOA is simply trying to force him to conform to aesthetic standards that have no legal basis over his property. The arguments went back and forth for over an hour. Klein brought up case law supporting HOA authority. Patricia countered with cases about land patents and property rights. The judge asked pointed questions of both sides, clearly taking the matter seriously. Finally, Judge Pratt sat back in her chair. I'm going to take this matter under advisement. I want to review the land patent and the relevant case law more thoroughly. I'll issue a ruling within 30 days. In the meantime, the HOA is enjoined from taking any action against Mr. Clayton's property. No liens, no fines, no harassment. Is that clear? Yes, Your Honor, both lawyers said in unison. We left the courthouse and I felt a strange mix of relief and continued anxiety. We hadn't lost, but we hadn't won either. 30 days, Patricia said as we stood on the courthouse steps. That's actually a good sign. If she was going to rule against us, she probably would have done it on the spot. The fact that she wants to research it means she's taking the land patent seriously. But we could still lose. We could. But I think we've got better than even odds. The next month was agonizing. I tried to keep busy with work on the property, but every day I wondered what Judge Pratt was thinking. Was she reading through the case law Patricia had cited? Was she examining the land patent? Or had she already made up her mind? The HOA, at least, had to back off. The injunction meant they couldn't send me any more threatening letters or file complaints. Deborah Hutchins drove by my property a few times, slowing down to stare, but she didn't stop. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in late August, my phone rang. It was Patricia. We won, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. What? Judge Pratt issued her ruling. She agreed with our argument. The land patent establishes superior title that predates and supersedes the HOA's authority. Your property is not subject to Meadowbrook Hills regulations. I sat down heavily on my porch steps, feeling like all the tension of the past months was draining out of me at once. We really won. We really won. And she did more than just rule in our favor. She awarded us attorneys' fees and costs, which means the HOA has to pay for our legal expenses. Plus, she issued a permanent injunction barring them from making any future claims against your property. How much are they going to owe us? About $18,000. That's my fees plus court costs. I laughed, a sound that was part relief and part disbelief. Deborah Hutchins is going to lose her mind. I imagine so. I'm sending you a copy of the order now. You should receive it by email in a few minutes. After we hung up, I just sat there for a while, looking out at my property. The barn stood solid against the sky. The chickens were clucking in their run. The old oak tree spread its branches wide. It was all still mine, and no one could take it away. The email arrived, and I read through Judge Pratt's order. Her language was clear and unequivocal. She traced the history of land patents in American law, explaining how they created superior title that couldn't be diminished by later regulations. She'd found that the 2001 HOA expansion had been improperly applied to my property, and that the HOA had no authority over me now or in the future. She'd also included a stern rebuke to the HOA for its aggressive tactics. The court is troubled by the evidence of harassment and intimidation directed at Mr. Clayton, she wrote. HOAs serve an important function in maintaining community standards, but that function does not extend to bullying property owners into compliance with regulations that do not legally apply to them. The court hopes that the Meadowbrook Hills HOA Board will take this ruling as an opportunity to reflect on its practices and treat all residents with the respect and fairness they deserve. That evening, I cracked open a beer and called my sister in Colorado to share the news. She'd been following the saga with a mix of concern and outrage, and she whooped with joy when I told her we'd won. "Grandpa would be so proud of you," she said. "He loved that land so much. I'm glad you fought for it." "I had good help," I said. "Patricia Morrison is a hell of a lawyer." Over the next few days, word of the ruling spread through Meadowbrook Hills. I got a few nasty looks from neighbors, but I also got some surprising support. A man about my age stopped by one evening and introduced himself as Marcus Chen. "I live 3 streets over," he said. "I just wanted to say congratulations on winning your case. A lot of us thought the board was out of line. Deborah and her cronies have been making everyone miserable for years with their petty rules and power trips." "Thanks," I said. "I just wanted to keep my family's land." "You did more than that. You proved they're not invincible. There's already talk about voting out the current board at the next election." That made me smile. "Good. Maybe the next board will be more reasonable." A week after the ruling, I received a certified check from the HOA for $18,000, along with a terse letter from Gerald Klein stating that the matter was closed. I deposited the check and used part of it to pay Patricia a bonus for her excellent work. The rest went into an account for future property maintenance. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, I was in the barn repairing some shelving when I heard vehicles pulling up outside. I walked out to find 2 Albemarle County Sheriff's deputies standing by their cruisers, along with a man in a suit who introduced himself as Deputy Commonwealth's Attorney Marcus Webb. My stomach dropped. "What's going on, Mr. Clayton? We need to ask you some questions," Webb said. "It's regarding the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association." "Am I in trouble?" "No, sir. You're not under investigation. The HOA is." That caught me off guard. "What did they do?" Webb glanced at the deputies, then back at me. "We've received allegations of fraud and embezzlement. Your case against the HOA prompted some of the residents to look more closely at the board's financial records. What they found was concerning enough that they filed a complaint with our office." "I don't understand. What does this have to do with me?" "We're talking to everyone who's had dealings with the current board. We understand you won a judgment against them recently." I nodded. "They tried to claim my property was part of their HOA when it wasn't." "Can you tell us about your interactions with Deborah Hutchins and the other board members?" I walked them through everything: the initial confrontation, the threatening letters, the harassment, and the court case. Webb took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Did you ever get the sense that they were motivated by something other than HOA regulations?" he asked. "What do you mean? Did they ever ask you to pay money directly to board members, or suggest any kind of deal to make the problem go away?" I thought about it. "No, nothing like that. Deborah was just obsessed with making my property look like all the others. It was like she couldn't stand that I wouldn't fall in line." Webb nodded. Thank you for your time, Mr. Clayton. If we have more questions, we'll be in touch. After they left, I called Patricia and told her about the visit. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Fraud and embezzlement. That's serious. If the board was misusing HOA funds, they could be facing criminal charges. You think it's related to my case? It's possible. Sometimes when you shine a light on one illegal action, it reveals others. If residents started digging into the board's records because of your lawsuit, they might have found something the board wanted to keep hidden." Over the next few weeks, the investigation became public knowledge. It turned out that Deborah Hutchins and 2 other board members had been siphoning money from the HOA's accounts for years. They'd created fake vendor invoices for maintenance work that was never done, paid themselves consulting fees for services they never provided, and used HOA funds for personal expenses. The total amount embezzled was over $200,000. The Albemarle County Sheriff's Office arrested Deborah Hutchins, board member Richard Patterson, and treasurer Linda Walsh on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The story made the local news, and suddenly, my case was back in the headlines as the catalyst that had brought down a corrupt HOA board. Reporters called asking for interviews. I declined most of them, but I did talk to one journalist from the Charlottesville Daily Progress who'd been following the story closely. "You feel vindicated?" she asked. "I just feel relieved," I said honestly. "I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to live on my family's land in peace. But I'm glad the truth came out. If my case helped expose what they were doing, then maybe some good came from it. What's next for you?" "I'm going to finish fixing up the homestead. Maybe get some goats to go with the chickens. Live a quiet life." The article ran the next day with the headline, "Land Patent Victory Exposes HOA Corruption." It was a fair piece, and I was pleased with how it turned out. The criminal cases against Deborah and the other board members moved forward over the fall. In November, Patricia called to tell me that all 3 had accepted plea deals. Deborah Hutchins pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud, receiving a sentence of 3 years in prison and restitution of $75,000. Patterson and Walsh got lighter sentences, 18 months each, in exchange for cooperating with prosecutors. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA held emergency elections and installed a new board. The new president, a retired teacher named Janet Chen, who was Marcus's mother, reached out to me personally to apologize for how I'd been treated. "What the previous board did was unconscionable," she said when she visited my property. "They gave HOAs a bad name. We're trying to rebuild trust with all our residents, and that includes being good neighbors to you, even though you're not technically part of our association." "I appreciate that," I said. "I'm not against HOAs in general. I just don't think mine should be part of one." "I understand completely. And for what it's worth, your property looks beautiful. You've done wonderful work preserving it." That meant more to me than she probably knew. As winter arrived, I settled into a routine on the homestead. I finished the repairs to the barn and started using it as a workshop. I added 4 goats to my menagerie, which my sister thought was hilarious. I planted a winter garden and spent evenings by the fireplace, reading and planning for spring. Occasionally, I drive through Meadowbrook Hills and see the identical houses with their perfect lawns and approved fencing. It looked nice enough, but it wasn't for me. I needed the freedom to make my own choices, to live on land that my family had worked for generations, to maintain the connection to the past that the homestead represented. One evening in December, I was sitting on my porch watching the sun set when Patricia called. "I wanted to check in and see how you're doing," she said. "I'm good, really good actually." "I'm glad to hear it. You've been through a lot this year." Thanks to you, it turned out okay. Thanks to that land patent, she corrected. That was the key to everything. Without it, we'd have had a much harder fight. My great-grandfather was a smart man. He was, and you were smart to fight for what was rightfully yours. After we hung up, I pulled out the land patent, which I had professionally preserved and framed. I hung it on the wall in my living room, right next to the old photographs of my ancestors. It was a reminder of where I came from and what I'd fought to protect. The winter months were peaceful. I kept to myself mostly, working on projects around the property and enjoying the quiet. I started researching my family history more deeply, discovering stories about my great-grandfather's journey from Tennessee to Virginia, his service in World War I, and the hard work of building the homestead from scratch. In February, I got an unexpected visitor. A young couple pulled up in a sedan, and when they knocked on my door, they introduced themselves as Emma and Daniel Rodriguez. "We're looking at buying property in the area," Emma explained. "We heard about your case with the HOA, and we were hoping to talk to you about it." I invited them in and made coffee, and they told me their story. They'd been looking at houses in Meadowbrook Hills but were put off by the strict HOA regulations. When they'd heard about a property owner who'd successfully fought back against the HOA, they'd gotten curious. "We want to find land where we can have a small farm," Daniel said. "Nothing huge, just enough space for some animals and a big garden, but every place we look at has an HOA or restrictions that would prevent that." "Have you looked for older properties?" I asked. "Places that predate the subdivisions, we have, but they're hard to find, and expensive." We talked for over an hour about property rights, HOA, and the importance of understanding what you're getting into before you buy. I showed them the land patent and explained its significance. "The lesson isn't that you need a land patent to protect yourself," I said. "It's that you need to do your research and know exactly what restrictions apply to any property you're considering. Read the HOA documents, understand what you're agreeing to, and if something doesn't feel right, walk away." They thanked me for my time and left with a lot to think about. I hoped they'd find what they were looking for. As spring arrived, I started planning a bigger garden and thinking about maybe adding some bees for honey production. The property was coming alive again after the winter, and I felt like I was really making it mine while honoring the legacy of those who'd come before me. In April, I got a letter from Janet Chen, the new HOA president. The Meadowbrook Hills Board was hosting a community picnic and wanted to invite me as a gesture of goodwill and neighborliness. I was surprised but touched by the offer. The picnic was on a Saturday afternoon at the community center. When I arrived, I half expected hostility, but instead people were friendly and welcoming. Janet introduced me around and several residents apologized for how I'd been treated. "We didn't know what Deborah and the others were really like," one woman said. "A lot of us were just as scared of them as you were. Marcus Chen brought his kids over to meet me and they were fascinated by my chickens and goats. 'Can we visit your farm sometime?' his daughter asked. 'Sure,' I said. 'Just have your parents call first.'" It struck me that there were good people in Meadowbrook Hills. The problem had never been the community itself. It had been a corrupt leadership that abused its power. With new management, maybe the HOA could actually be what it was supposed to be, a way for neighbors to work together to maintain their community. But I was still glad I wasn't part of it. As summer approached, I hired a local teenager to help me with some of the heavier work around the property. His name was Tyler, and he was saving money for college. He was a hard worker and genuinely interested in learning about property maintenance and farming. "My grandpa had a farm," he told me one afternoon as we were repairing a section of fence. "He sold it years ago when the development went in." I always wished I could have seen it. What happened to him? He moved to a condo in town. He's still there, but he talks about the farm all the time. I think he regrets selling. I thought about how close I'd come to losing the homestead. Tell your grandpa he should come visit sometime. I'd be happy to show him around. Really. He'd love that. A week later, Tyler brought his grandfather, a man named Harold Washington who had to be in his 80s. He walked slowly with a cane, but his eyes lit up when he saw the property. "This reminds me of my place," he said, before they carved it up into subdivisions. We spent the afternoon walking the property, with Harold sharing stories about farming in the area decades ago. He talked about a time when the land around Charlottesville was mostly agricultural, before the city sprawled outward and swallowed up the farms. "You did the right thing, fighting to keep this place," he told me as he was leaving. "Too many of us gave in without a fight. We thought the money was worth it, but it wasn't. You can't put a price on land that's been in your family for generations." His words stayed with me long after he left. By midsummer, the homestead was in the best shape it had been in years. The house gleamed with fresh paint. The barn stood straight and sturdy. The gardens were producing vegetables, and the animals were healthy and content. I'd even started selling eggs at the local farmers market on weekends, making a little extra money and meeting people in the community. Life had fallen into a rhythm that felt right. I woke with the sun, took care of the animals, worked on various projects, and spent evenings on the porch watching the sky change colors. It wasn't an easy life. There was always something that needed fixing or improving, but it was deeply satisfying in a way my engineering job in Richmond had never been. One evening in July, I was sitting on the porch when I saw a familiar white SUV coming up my driveway. My first instinct was anxiety, but then I realized it wasn't Deborah Hutchins. She was in prison. It was Janet Chen. She got out with a basket in her hands. "I hope I'm not intruding. I brought some homemade jam as a thank you." "For what?" "For standing up to the old board. A lot of us have been talking, and we realize now that they were bullying people for years. Your lawsuit gave others the courage to speak up about the embezzlement. You changed things for the better." I took the basket, feeling awkward but pleased. I was just protecting my property. Sometimes that's all it takes, one person willing to fight back. She looked around at the homestead. "This place really is special. I can see why you fought so hard for it." After she left, I opened the basket and found 6 jars of homemade strawberry jam, along with a card signed by dozens of Meadowbrook Hills residents. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to me. As the first anniversary of my confrontation with Deborah Hutchins approached, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. I'd gone from a civil engineer living in the city to a homesteader fighting for his family's legacy. I'd been threatened, harassed, and sued, but I'd come out the other side with my property intact and my rights affirmed. The land patent had been the key to everything. That single document, carefully preserved by my grandfather and his father before him, had proven that sometimes the old ways, the old laws, and the old claims still matter. The federal government's grant of land to my great-grandfather in 1923 had created rights that couldn't be taken away by a homeowners association formed 75 years later. But it was more than just a legal victory. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult and expensive. It was about refusing to be bullied by people who thought their petty rules were more important than a family's history and heritage. I thought about my great-grandfather, clearing this land and building the house with his own hands. I thought about my grandfather, maintaining the property through wars and depressions, and all the changes that came with the 20th century. I thought about my father, who'd loved this place even though he'd moved away for work, always intending to come back someday. And now it was mine to protect and pass on to the next generation. One afternoon in early August, I was working in the garden when Tyler came running up from the barn. "Mr. Clayton, there's someone here to see you. She says she's from a law school." I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked around to the front of the house. A woman in her 40s stood by a Honda Accord, smiling as I approached. "Mr. Clayton, I'm Professor Angela Hartman from the University of Virginia School of Law. I've been following your case with great interest. Professor, what can I do for you?" "I'd love to interview you for a paper I'm writing about land patents and property rights. Your case is particularly significant because it demonstrates how historical property claims can supersede modern regulatory structures. It's rare to see such a clear-cut example." We spent 2 hours talking about the case, the land patent, and the broader implications for property law. She was fascinated by every detail and asked if she could photograph the patent for her research. "Cases like yours are important," she said as she was leaving. "They remind us that property rights have deep historical roots, and those roots can't be casually dismissed." "I'll send you a copy of the paper when it's published." "I'd like that," I said. A few weeks later, I received an email from her with a draft of the paper. It was titled "Land Patents as Superior Title, the Clayton Homestead and the Limits of HOA Authority." Reading it felt surreal. My little property dispute had become academic scholarship. But more importantly, it might help others in similar situations. If someone else was facing an aggressive HOA and they had an old property claim, they'd have this research to support their case. As fall arrived and the leaves started turning, I found myself thinking about the future. The homestead was secure, the legal battles were over, and I had a peaceful life. But I also realized I wanted to do more with the property. I started offering workshops on basic homesteading skills, chicken care, gardening, simple carpentry. Tyler helped me set up a small classroom area in the barn, and I advertised through the local community center. To my surprise, the workshops filled up quickly. People were hungry for knowledge about self-sufficiency and traditional skills. Among my students was a young woman named Olivia Finch, who just moved to the area from New York City. She was trying to escape the corporate world and learn how to live more simply. She reminded me of myself a year ago, searching for something more meaningful than a desk job and a mortgage. "I never thought I'd be learning to build a chicken coop," she said one Saturday, hammer in hand. "But this feels more real than anything I did in finance." "That's because you're creating something tangible," I said. "You can see the results of your work. That's rare these days." The workshops became a regular part of my life, and I enjoyed teaching. It was a way to share what I'd learned and help others develop the skills to be more independent and self-reliant. In November, I received a letter from the county assessor's office. I opened it nervously, worried it might be some new problem, but instead it was a notice that my property had been designated as a historic site. Apparently, the publicity from my case had drawn attention to the homestead's age and significance. The designation came with some tax benefits and, more importantly, protection from future development pressures. It was one more layer of security for the land my family had fought so hard to keep. As the holiday season approached, my sister flew in from Colorado with her husband and 2 kids. They'd never seen the homestead since I'd taken it over, and watching my niece and nephew run around the property, chasing chickens and exploring the barn, filled me with joy. "Grandpa would love seeing this," my sister said as we stood on the porch watching the kids play. "You've really brought this place back to life." "It was never dead," I said, "just waiting for someone to appreciate it again." On Christmas Eve, we had a small gathering at the homestead. I invited Tyler and his family, including his grandfather Harold. Janet Chen and her family came by, as did a few of my workshop students. It wasn't a big party, but it was warm and genuine, filled with good food and better company. As I looked around at everyone gathered in my living room, with the land patent hanging proudly on the wall, I realized how much my life had changed in just over a year. I'd gone from being alone and embattled to being part of a community, not the forced community of an HOA, but a real community built on mutual respect and shared values. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, I sat by the fireplace with a cup of coffee and thought about everything that had happened. The confrontation with Deborah Hutchins felt like ancient history now, but the lessons from that experience were still fresh. I'd learned that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when the odds seem stacked against you. I'd learned that old documents and historical claims can still have power in the modern world. I'd learned that standing up to bullies, whether they're individuals or institutions, can inspire others to do the same. Most importantly, I'd learned the value of land and legacy. This property wasn't just dirt and buildings, it was the accumulated effort of 4 generations of Claytons, each one adding their own chapter to the story. And now, it was my turn to write my chapter and ensure there would be chapters to come. In January, I received notice that Professor Hartman's paper had been published in the Virginia Law Review. She sent me a copy with a note thanking me for my cooperation. The paper had already generated interest in academic circles and had been cited in 2 ongoing property rights cases in other states. My case was becoming precedent, helping others fight similar battles. That felt good. As winter gave way to spring again, I started planning expansions to the workshop program. Tyler was graduating high school and had decided to take a gap year before college, working with me on the homestead and learning more about sustainable living. He'd become like a younger brother to me, and I was happy to mentor him. Olivia Finch had bought a small property on the other side of Charlottesville and was starting her own homesteading journey. She stopped by regularly for advice and to share her progress. "You inspired me," she told me once. "Not just with the HOA case, but with how you live. You're actually doing what so many people just talk about." "I was lucky," I said. "I had the land patent to protect me. Not everyone has that. But you still had to fight. You could have given in and taken the easy path. You didn't." She was right, I suppose. The easy path would have been to settle with the HOA, maybe sell the property and move somewhere without restrictions. But the easy path isn't always the right path. In April, Marcus Chen's mother Janet stepped down as HOA president, having served long enough to stabilize the association and restore trust. In her farewell letter to residents, she mentioned my case as a turning point that had forced the community to examine its values and priorities. "We learned that being good neighbors is more important than enforcing arbitrary rules," she wrote. "We learned that diversity, even in how properties look and are used, makes a community stronger, not weaker. And we learned that respecting people's rights and history should always come before maintaining perfect uniformity." I was touched by her words and grateful that something positive had come from such a difficult experience. As the 2nd anniversary of my confrontation with Deborah Hutchins approached, I decided to host a celebration. I invited everyone who'd supported me during the ordeal: Patricia Morrison, Tyler and his family, my sister and her family, the people from my workshops, and even some of the Meadowbrook Hills residents who'd reached out with support over the past 2 years. We set up tables on the lawn, grilled burgers and hot dogs, and spent the afternoon eating, talking, and enjoying the beautiful May weather. Patricia brought her husband, and they regaled everyone with stories from the courtroom. Harold Washington shared more tales of old-time farming, and the kids ran wild playing games and exploring. At one point, I found myself standing under the old oak tree with Tyler, looking back at the house and the people gathered on the lawn. "You've built something special here," Tyler said. "My great-grandfather built it. I'm just keeping it going." "No, I mean this: the community, the workshops, everything you've created in the past 2 years. You took a bad situation and turned it into something positive." Maybe he was right. I'd fought to protect the homestead, but in the process, I'd found a new purpose. I was teaching people, building connections, and proving that there was still value in the old ways of doing things. As the sun set and the party wound down, I stood on my porch and looked out at my land. The same land my great-grandfather had claimed over 100 years ago. The same land that had sustained my family through generations of challenges and changes. The same land that I'd fought to keep and would continue to protect for as long as I drew breath. The land patent hung on my wall as a reminder of that fight and that victory. But it was more than just a legal document. It was a symbol of perseverance, of the importance of knowing your rights, and of the power of ordinary people to stand up against institutions that overreach their authority. I thought about Deborah Hutchins, sitting in prison for her crimes, and I felt no satisfaction in her downfall. I'd never wanted to destroy anyone. I just wanted to be left alone to live my life on my own property. But her overreach had exposed the corruption beneath the surface of the HOA, and in the end, justice had been served. The HOA had learned its lesson. I'd kept my land, and life had moved on better than before. As I went inside that night, I passed the land patent on the wall and paused to read the familiar words one more time. "Know ye that William Clayton has been granted these lands in fee simple, free and clear of all encumbrances, by the authority of the United States of America." Those words had saved my homestead. Those words had defeated an overreaching HOA. Those words had proven that sometimes the old documents matter most of all. I turned off the lights and headed to bed, grateful for my ancestors' foresight, Patricia's skill, and my own stubborn refusal to give up what was rightfully mine. Tomorrow I'd wake up and tend to my chickens, work in my garden, and maybe teach another workshop. I'd live the life my great-grandfather had made possible when he claimed this land in 1923, and I'd do it on my terms, on my property, free from the tyranny of any homeowners association. The judge had shown them the land patent, and that had made all the difference.